You've probably seen that the Neverwinter community rags on the game probably more than anybody else, so it's
So
fine.
much. So much.
Yeah.
When I first kind of set out to do this project, I was like, man, these people are so negative about the game that they're playing all the time. And anytime I asked like any questions, it was like, be like, hey, is the game worth playing, right now? And it'd be someone with like 8,000 hours in the game. They're like, nah, it's trash, it's garbage, go somewhere else. And you're like, oh,
I'm happy to shed some light on that, because yeah, I had a very similar experience when I started.
so
Yep.
what was your in-game name again?
Lunar Winter.
Would you like me to call you that or Frost for the interview?
Either Frost or Luna. Probably go with Luna because it's probably what like the people in the game recognize me as. So yeah.
I will say I felt like after about 50 hours in game and probably another 50 hours of probing communities and forums and Reddits and all that stuff, it seems that the negativity surrounding the game from the game's player base comes from a place of pain more than anything else. Kind of reminds me of being more spiteful about how something has changed, not so much about how it is, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's true. Now see, I'm just telling you what I've heard. I should probably
Yes. Yeah.
just start interviewing you at this point.
Yep.
Really I want your perspective and your experience with the game from the beginning to now.
I played the game way back when it first came out on Xbox, about 2014-ish, for about half a year. I played it like enough with my friends then that I got a good feel of it, but I didn't like approach endgame or anything like that. I had a couple of characters, but I lost the drive to really play it more, and I was focused on other games. I didn't really start playing again until one of my friends on PC said, "Hey, do you want to start playing Neverwinter?" And knowing that Neverwinter was set in Dungeons and Dragons, I decided, okay, sure, I'll give it a shot. Oh, he got like a bunch of people, and everyone quit within like a month, not even like a week or so. I'm the only one that stuck around. I will start. There's a lot of things I like about this game, but there has been a lot of changes that were just not done in the way they should have been. Even if they're like the end result is positive, the way that they're implemented was massively negative. I guess what do you want me to start off with
I was gonna
talking
say,
about?
can you give me an example of what you just
So
described?
there were three companions that kind of dominated the metagame of having like with you. One was called Zuna, one was the Air Archon, and I've forgotten the other one. There was like three options that people could pick. Then out of nowhere, the devs just shadow nerfed the Air Archon. So they reduced the damage it dealt by like 10 times to the point where it's completely unusable. But they didn't have it in any patch notes. There was no warning, no compensation for people that dumped millions of in-game money into it, because you need to spend I think it's 1.5 million astral diamonds to upgrade it from legendary to mythic, or 150 tokens, which tokens for like veterans and some paying players aren't that hard to get. Like you can get them from the trade bar store, which you get from the keys from the lockboxes, and you get the lockbox keys through the VIP program, which most people are paying for. The fact is that they gave zero warning, zero compensation, and the apology was, "Oh, sorry, we won't do that again." And then the week after, they nerfed Zuna, and Cold Iron Warrior was the other one. To the point where the three items that people were selling for like exorbitant amounts of the money. We're talking about if you converted like real world money into Zen for it, it'll be hundreds of dollars. It did leave a pretty sour taste when everyone in the game had their things that they spent so many hours working towards and improving were just nerfed in the ground with zero compensation, with almost no warning. It felt like it was a big hit for no reason, if that makes sense.
So instead of making the other things better to even out the
Yeah.
value, they just obliterated the value of a few things.
Yes, and because of that, they like ever since then, companions like damage companions really haven't been that good. It was just a very unnecessary way to do it, and there was like no tact put into it, no thought consideration into the fact that people had spent so much time and so much, even real world dollars in some cases, on actually getting these things up to a good position, and then they took the nerf hammer to it. It's just a bit it's left a sour taste, and that's a sour taste that really hasn't went away for a lot of people's mouths
How do you feel about the content cuts they did?
I don't think cutting content was really that great of an idea. I feel like they could have still had those zones, but made them either optional or allow you to pick which zone you were doing in the leveling experience. I think that would have been the way to do it because they clearly wanted to shrink the leveling experience so that it didn't take 30, 40 hours to get there because they wanted people to reach the newer content that they were advertising. I feel like there was a better way. I never think cutting content, but Neverwinter's something that has cut content tons. Back when this game first dropped, there were about 20 dungeons and a lot of them were cut from the game. There was a time, I don't remember, was it really early on, where they just said, okay, these dungeons need to be reworked. And they cut them from the game, and they're still missing to this day. I'm not sure if anybody you've spoken to has mentioned this, but Castle Never was like the peak dungeon. It was like the equivalent of today's Vault of Stars, but back then it was like this really, really difficult thing that was like an actual achievement if you managed to beat. It's been, the whole zone has been changed to a normal temple, like leveling dungeon in the very first area in Neverdeath Graveyard. They've just made a lot of weird changes, a lot of weird recycling of older zones that a newer player won't really pick up on. But an older player will like, okay, then why is this thing that I have so many memories for just a generic dungeon that I have to walk through? It feels like that they don't have the resources to be able to make something new. They've just put up a new sale for one of the enchantments. They've put up some new companions are available just for like the next week or two. Like they're constantly putting out new things onto the store, but it doesn't feel like that money's going anywhere except the pockets of the executives. Hard to really get across, but I think, do you understand what I mean?
I can't compare what it used to feel like
Yes.
compared to now, but
Yep.
my experience, it kind of felt like
Yep.
a mobile game where you kind of just walk along the dotted line. The game's almost feels played for you in a way. There's like the path that you walk on and then the monetization of the game, and those two pillars are so prevalent. It just doesn't feel like a game. It
Yep.
feels like a mobile game, because to me that's what
And
mobile games, you follow the dotted line and you give us all of your money, is kind of what I associate with mobile gaming.
and you bang on with that, right? Like it is very follow the sparkly path and all the way. A lot of people have left over the last year or so because there's nothing to do. It's been since probably end of 2020 that any content has really hit the game that hasn't been done within a week. Like they added a new campaign, which I'm not sure if you've done it, Dragonbone Vale. It's the best area they've probably done yet, in my opinion. Like it's fantastic. The visuals for the area are great. The mechanics are great. The map design's awesome, but the campaign was boring as. It was do the same 3 missions over and over and over again for 4 weeks and you're done. And that's the whole bit of content that they've released for us for the next 6 months. It feels that there's been no thought given to how the game will work at the end game. Back when the Castle Never, which I spoke about a little bit before, the gear that you got to max your character was scattered in amongst like a lot of dungeons. So there was like 8 dungeons that were the end game dungeons, and your gear could be scattered like from the bosses in each of them. So you had to run them all, like you had to run maybe 3 dungeons to get the 4 bits of gear that you needed. So you had to do like all these different bits of content, and it wasn't as quick to become boring because you were doing so many of these little things, like other dungeons. It wasn't just the same thing over and over again. It does sound like I'm ragging on it a bit, but there is reasons I love this game, and I feel like it's worth mentioning those. That I really, really like the environment, so I reckon they've done a lot of the areas justice. When I was DMing for in Neverwinter and Waterdeep and stuff like that, the Yawning Portal, seeing that for the first time in game
Oh
was
yeah.
incredible. Like
Yes,
that's
seeing the yawning portal and the barkeeper, I think was
yes,
like my highlight so far in the game.
yeah, exactly. He's fantastic. I ran through the whole of Waterdeep Dragon Heist, the 5e module. Play like voicing and feeling like I was connected with those characters and seeing them pretty much exactly how I pictured it was awesome. And then going through the Undermountain, which is like a really nice visual area with a lot of like cool bits to it. Like the environment design team in this game, I reckon is really good. Over time, the quest quality has really become just generic fetch quests.
To me that translates as just bad overall management. when you have teams that are competent, but they seem like their direction isn't in sync, then you know that there's some shot caller above them that just can't determine what direction the game should be and then double down on it.
And I fully believe that. Like, the people at the very top of the game clearly don't have an idea on what they want the game to be. Something that I think is insane is that none of the people, none of the top management actually play this game. They will say their ideas and what they want it to be, but none of them have sat down to actually play through what they're making the players play through. They haven't sat down to realize, oh, Demogorgon was completely broken. They've only just removed that. I don't know if you ever played through the Demogorgon trial. It was a 10-man raid where you had to fight the big boss Demogorgon. They reworked the trial probably 6 months ago. Before that, it was pretty easy. And what they wanted to do, they wanted to make Demogorgon a lot more intimidating and a lot more scary. For endgame groups that are playing through it with maxed gear and everything like that, it's still easy. But the people that were getting Demogorgon were not the maxed people. They were the new players, the ones that had been in it for 50 hours, that had just found out a button called the random trial queue and were like, oh, cool, this is how you earn Astral Diamonds. They would click on it, be thrown into a dungeon that they literally cannot complete because they don't deal enough damage to complete it. And that was it. They would have to just leave. And then you would leave and get a 30-minute penalty. And you couldn't join a dungeon for 30 minutes because the game made it too hard. It was ridiculous that they put effectively an endgame trial in a queue that a random guy who's just completed like Undermountain has just hit 30,000 iron level, which is like super, super early on.
Yeah, because then you're
And
instantly, the thought is not they designed an impossible task. The thought
yeah,
becomes I suck at playing this
yeah.
character.
Especially if they've like, if it's the very first thing they've done, like you're going to have like some serious quit moments of people going, okay, I can't deal with this. This is not fun. And then leaving the game. And the game's already hemorrhaging players because of the lack of content, because of the changes to companions, because of the changes to enchantments. Like everyone's complaining about the enchantment changes. So there's a lot of things that are being changed and a lot of thought that just hasn't been put into the game. I'm sure if they toned down the monetization a little bit, focused on actually teaching people the game mechanics, and had a well thought out content system, the game would be perfect. Like it would work, and it would be an actual MMO that, like, it wouldn't be in the negative state that everyone sees it in now. It would be a healthy MMO at the very least. It makes me think of Rainbow Six when they had their Operation Health, when they refixed the game. It feels like Neverwinter needs one of those, and they had the perfect time to do that last year, but they didn't. They fixed nothing. They changed the leveling experience, added the bard, and they just didn't touch anything else beyond that. And now we're at the point where pretty much every player that's stuck with the game since then has hit endgame. They've done everything that they can do, and now they're bored.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like there's very much width to the game. Because I know like a
Yeah,
lot of games when I'm even if I like let's say I get to end game raiding, but I'm not like in the mood for it, or my guild only raids 1 day a week, so I need something to do for the other 6 days. Yeah, I
yeah.
always latch onto those secondary systems and collecting and doing side content. And it seemed to me that Neverwinter doesn't have any of that.
It's sort of got it in the case of like other campaigns, but like, and the other solo content with that, but that's not enough. There is no, as you were saying, no collectibles. There's no walking around. Like when you're finding all these stuff, like, or doing the content that you're supposed to be doing, it's insanely repetitive. It's the same. Do these quests, hand them in, get a new set of the identical quests, go do them again. They have basically fell on 3 quests in each area, and that's all you get, and you just repeat the same thing until you hit a weekly cap, and then that's you done. And it's not fun, which is sad because the dungeons in the game, I reckon, are fantastic. Like Vault of Stars is super, super fun. The Infernal Citadel, when you're actually geared for it and understand what you're doing, is super, super fun. And so is like Tower of the Mad Mage, so is Zariel's Challenge, so is Crown of Keldagon. Like they've got good dungeons there and some good mechanics and some interesting things, but they haven't taken the loving care to make the rest of the game around it enjoyable. It's got to the point where I'm logging in every day for my like key and other stuff like that, but I haven't played it like properly for about 3 weeks now because there's just nothing to do. and I finished all of it, and there isn't anything there for me to tackle. There's no new players for me to come and teach, like give the mechanics, which I really, really enjoyed. Like I love that community aspect of talking to people and going, "Hey, we can do this. Let's do this."
So I got a kind of a
Yep.
lengthy question for you, if I may. What I find super interesting and also a little strange is normally when I get into an older MMO and it's got like a dwindling player base and stuff like that, I'm kind of expecting to kind of walk into a game that has a it's dying. It's been put in maintenance mode. It doesn't get any more updates, stuff like that. And I guess I was kind of expecting that with Neverwinter, and I was, more or less planning on documenting kind of how the game was left, and then interviewing how they feel about their game that hasn't been touched in a while. And then Neverwinter, it was so weird because I've never seen a game that has been gutted as much.
Yeah.
um,
No.
but
Yep.
when people were talking about it, I thought it was something that happened like 5 years ago. I thought it was like, they stopped making content. But when I actually got in the game and I was looking around, I'm like, it's weird that like the leveling system I went through is kind of fresh, and the quests I did through it are kind of fresh. And there's this, this DL or not DLC, but the what do you guys call them? Modules.
The
It had like just dropped, and it was like it's bizarre because it doesn't feel like a game that's in maintenance mode. It feels like a game that's being actively worked on and developed, but it also seems like more's being gutted than added, or things are being reused, but then the community believes it to be more misused than reused. So with all of that in mind, because that's insanely confusing to me, and there's so much nuance to each one of those things. The question is, with all of that in mind, how do you feel about the immediate, future of the game over the next, let's say, 2 years?
It's hard to say. So if they continue with gutting extra systems as they have done and cutting content, this game will be dead by then. Like, as in, like, it doesn't have any hope of surviving, which sucks because I do love this game and I want it to succeed. And I think everyone that plays it, we want the game to be better. A lot of people are still negative and toxic about that, but it does, as you have said before, it comes from a place of pain. We know that it's unlikely to get better, but because they keep making these changes. But I do think that deep down we all actually want it to be the best it can be. It's really dependent on what because they're getting a new management structure, or at least it seems like they are. I believe that they've hired some new people, or shifted some roles around, and it's really dependent on if those people can actually understand the problems that the games have. If the next module they do in the next 6 months or so, or 4 months probably now, if they have a content system where it is unique, it's fresh, it's well thought out, and it's going to last for a few months of content that isn't explicitly grindy, like if there is still fun to the grind, then I'm pretty hopeful that the game will be good. Because all they need to, like, at the end game level to make people happy, they just need to expand the options and the avenues for getting new gear, for getting new improvements, and making the end game loop exciting at the very least. Because it is very much like do the same dungeon at the moment. If they can manage to get the well thought out system there, I think that the end game will be fine, at least covered for the next little bit. The mid game is sort of where the game is falls apart a bit, and I do feel like it only takes a few changes to really make that satisfying. Like, I'm generally pretty positive for the game in the future. Like, I'm probably one of the few people in the game that isn't massively negative against it. The things they've done in the past aren't great, obviously. Like, I've just spoken about a lot of them, but in general, I am still positive with it. I still find this game fun. I still find meeting players in this great fun. Like, it's hard to describe, but I think that this community is like the people I've met on this game that have been like players in it are incredible. Like, they're all from so many different walks of life, so many different backgrounds, so many different countries. Because Neverwinter's on one global server. Being Australian myself, I've met people from India, from Brazil, from the UK. In the immediate future, so going back to the question a bit, in the immediate future, for the next 6 months, I can't see the game getting any better. In the next year, It really depends on how good this next module is coming out, whether the game will be alive or if it will fall apart. It is a great question because I don't think anyone really truly knows at the moment.
Well,
So
the company boggles my mind. Like, just I'm
yeah,
so confused because D&D exploded over the past like 3 years. Uh
yep,
I've been I've been a hardcore D&D player for the past 20 years and I have never seen
yes,
it spike so drastically. So my assumption was that Neverwinter would have grown with that in some way, or maybe shifted, pivoted in some way. And then Star Trek has had a recent explosion, which is another
yep,
IP. And
yeah,
then you got your DC Marvel universe that's exploded over the past, X number of years. And I'm like, they've got a superhero game, a Star Trek game, and a D&D game. These are IPs that are doing in a lot of cases better than they've ever done. And then I look at all their games and they just don't feel like they're even doing anything with them,
yeah.
which
No,
is
I
so
fully agree.
strange. So strange to me.
Um, Particularly, I know that Star Trek Online, at least the management there is a bit better than Neverwinter's. The thing with Star Trek is the people that actually play it, like the people that are in charge, do play it. Whereas with Neverwinter, they don't. And I think it's such a strange thing to have people say this is what's best for the game when they haven't touched it, when they haven't experienced any of the dungeons outside a like development room, where they haven't walked in with four random people as they're expecting people to do and attempt to accomplish these mechanics. It's really strange that they've got these people in charge that don't understand what the game actually needs because they haven't played it to understand what the game actually needs, or they haven't got new players to come in to test the game and to give them feedback on it. It's weird, and I don't think they realize that they're out of their depth talking about this stuff because like I'm fairly sure you could ask like any endgame player in particular what the game needs and they'll all kind of come back with the same thing. It's weird thoughts that they really haven't done anything with the IP, have they? Like, there was an explosion during 2020 of players, especially with, like people having enough free time to actually be able to tackle a game.
Yeah, and it's weird too because as a big D&D fan, I mean, I completely geeked out like when I got my flail snail mount. It's like
Yes,
one of the
yeah.
happiest gaming moments of my life. Yeah, just something about it, is just incredible.
Getting that for the first time in the game was super, super satisfying.
And the
And
models look
having,
amazing. The
yeah,
animations are great. And like
yep,
you said before, the environments are great. And that's I would say that is the peak of the confusion of the game for me, is that the tools seem to be there, the assets seem to be there, the animations, the art, the models, all that
yep,
stuff. It feels like everything you could possibly need to make the perfect D&D world, living, breathing world is right there, like just sitting on their palms. And then they're like, we just removed a dungeon. And you're like, but why?
yes,
And
like,
everyone's just like, what? But why did you do it?
yeah. I fully agree, and I think that's kind of like the short of it. They have every single bit to get it right, and they've still managed to screw it up. And they've still managed to screw it up by making weird management decisions and weird just gameplay decisions. It's strange that they managed to make like the base of the game so strong, but it all falls apart when you actually get to the gameplay loop. Like the combat, I reckon, is fantastic. It has every single bit of thing that you want in an MMO style combat. You got the invulnerability frames, you got the dodges, you've got the encounters, you've got your super powerful ultimate ability in the daily, you've got like your artifacts and mounts to coordinate with the rest of your group. They're super simple on the surface level, but they get really deep and complicated the more you look into it and trying to coordinate with the rest of your group, saying, hey, I'll run a debuff artifact that will make us deal more damage if you run something that makes us take less damage.
I mean, I out of every single person I have spoken to, every player of the game, whether they've been playing since day one, they've been playing only for a couple months, or they've been playing for a few years, every single person, it seems like the thought or the feeling of the game boils down to confusion, like awkward
Yes.
confusion. And that's
And
interesting. It's real interesting because a lot of games that I check out, people are just you can almost like there's like a breadcrumb trail. You can kind of like develop the story why things happened. And here it seems like no one has any clue. Like
yeah,
there's no explanation for anything.
I'm very confused looking into it. I don't know. I think a lot of the downfall of what the game was, and a lot of people would agree, is probably with Mod 16. So when they changed the stat system and the encounter powers and the progression system, before that, there used to be a lot more in-depth upgrades you can make to your character. And they stripped it all back for a very simple system. They don't want a lot of choices. They want the choices that people make to be meaningful, which sounds fine on the surface, but the way they implement it just strips the choice without giving a meaningful decision in there. It's really frustrating because, as you mentioned, there's so much confusion. Why would you do that? Why would you take away the player choice that people liked? I don't think a single person in this game can answer why they decided to get rid of the 2 weapon enchantments and change it with one that is just objectively worse in every way. I don't even think the devs can actually answer that question, because I don't think anyone really knows. Like, it was just some decision from a management and they just went and did it.
It's weird because you have this big pile of stuff that's broken. Some of it's been busted for 8 years that
Yep.
no one's working on, and then you got a pile of stuff that they're working on for the future. I don't want to say incomplete, but just not really enough for a 6 month window. It feels like 80% of their development is going into fixing things that aren't broke or removing things that no one asked to be removed or developing things that no one asked to be developed. But it does feel, from my very, very, very limited perspective, there's that break apart that the community does not feel like it owes the development team anything, and the development team doesn't feel like it owes the community anything, almost like they're at odds with each other. I would say an aggressive way from the community and a passive aggressive way from the development team, because
Yeah.
obviously they can't be openly aggressive. In the zone wipe, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was something along the lines of we know that you guys don't like it when we take things away, and we don't make these decisions lightly, and you can trust us. It was well thought out, and it's only for the greater good of the game. And it was just all of these empty platitudes. You basically said, don't worry about it, you can trust me, in like 6 paragraphs of garbage, of nothing. So it's really sad to see that disconnect, because in a perfect world, you would have developers who love the game, play the game, and are passionate about the game, and then you'd have players who are very passionate players of the game. I think of like Final Fantasy 14, which I play quite a bit of. There, you can tell that there is a deep connection between the developers and the players. You know.
Yeah. You honestly have managed to grasp, in the week that you've been with like this game, every single problem that this game has better than the developers have in the last 5 years. Like,
Well, thank you.
it's crazy that that it isn't a complicated problem. It is a, hey, sit down here for 2 hours with a bunch of people that have played the game, and again, they will seriously, everyone will tell the game devs the same things. Like, it'll be the same 5 points that are brought up, and if the devs took the time to go, hey, here's how we're going to address them. Here's a roadmap of how we all want it to work. We understand that this isn't the best place for us, and even apologize in some places for, hey, sorry for implementing the enchantment rework and effectively nullifying years of your progress. Sorry about that. Here's how we are going to make things better. Here's the game that we want this to become. Like, the roadmaps they've given have never been good. They've never stuck to it. Like, they'll give a promise and it will always be an empty promise, because we know that they just haven't, like, they aren't delivering on that. And it's crazy to me that, again, in that Reddit Ask Me Anything, like, where they spoke about like the amount of people that work on this game, there were tons, but it doesn't show because no one is doing any quality testing on this. The poor developers are getting screwed by the management because they're not able to work on like the things that they want to touch.
That's fair. That's
And
a fair point.
I think that it's worth stressing that the poor developers that are actually working on this game, a lot of the cases that they're being stifled by upper management. I do feel like maybe sometimes they do come off as like incompetent, like quality control should be picking up on all of this, but they're not. And the people, like the designers, aren't telling us where they want to take the game. They've, again, as you said, they're just saying trust us. And like, I'm sorry, but we've trusted you for 3 years, and all you've done is change how the stats work, gotten rid of the engaging power trees that used to exist. They've gotten rid of the companion roles they used to have, instead homogenized it all into just damage dealing or stat boosting companions. They've gotten rid of the enchantment system, completely scrapping combat enchantments, also the old weapon and armor enchantments for this new combat enchantments, which are just negative in every way. Like, it's always trust us, but they're not giving us a reason to trust them, and it's really, really frustrating. I played other games. I played ESO, I played some other MMOs, and I honestly believe that those communities are not as good as the one we've got in Neverwinter. If you're ignoring the vocal minority, taking just the people that are playing the game and talking to them and engaging in them, they are some of the nicest people I've ever met. They're so with it, and they're so willing to help you out. It's just really frustrating seeing that the devs are slowly stifling, like basically choking this game and milking it for everything it's worth. It's possible. It's definitely possible, and it would just take them admitting it, I guess, that they've made mistakes, and they're not willing to admit that because of whatever reason, pride perhaps, or some other thing. It's frustrating.
Yeah, I don't think I've met a more helpful and kind community that seems genuinely excited every time they see a new player who is also as jaded as this community is.
Yeah,
It's
and I
the
think it definitely comes from like, we don't like the developers that are in charge of this. We don't like what they've done to us, and we are like 100% jaded and can be seriously negative. But at the same time, this is a game that we do love. It's just I love the being able to find these new players, be able to like to take them in and to see them grow and to be like connected, and like it helps build a community that is so great. But it's hard to maintain that positivity all the time when they'll just make a sweeping change for zero reason whatsoever.
What's interesting talking to you that I haven't really experienced as much talking to other people is the way you talk about the game, and this is just my perspective. It seems that you almost portray an air of a candle burning at two ends. One end being the content, the expectation of the content of the game burning too fast. So you got too little content over too long a period of time. And everyone expresses that. I think that's what most people who are deep dove into the game are pretty upset about. What's interesting though, talking to you, the other end of that candle, player agency. I haven't heard someone mention things that are so closely tied to losing the agency of choice and losing the agency of development over your character. And I know from specifically from a D&D background, you know, and you could almost say in this sense the developers are the dungeon masters in a way. This sense that the dungeon master is taking the agency you had with your character away from your character without explaining why. So do you feel that you're losing that connection with your character, or that your character has somehow become less yours with all these changes?
Yes, I think that you've hit the like nail on the head with that like description. Yes, I definitely feel that we're losing some of our choice, our player agency, our choice. Used to have like whenever you leveled up, like every time you leveled up, you would get a little thing that you could choose in like one of these three trees, depending on what your class is, which could specialize your class in whatever you wanted. I remember that the rogue had one that was like built around invisibility, being a lot more like focused on being like impermanent stealth and getting bonuses depending on your positioning. And then some of the others were focused more on like dealing bleed damage over time or other things like that. And you could really specialize what you wanted your class to be in. But they really scrapped that for every class is sort of the same. You've got the two paragons that you could pick through. The rogue, you can pick the assassin or the whisper knight. They do have some changes, but they're fundamentally the same. They're just damage dealers. Then you got things like the cleric, where you got the cleric that's a damage dealer, and then the other one's a healer. But everyone that picked like a paragon will play the class identically. There's not much that separates one cleric devout healer from another cleric devout healer. Everyone's using the same encounter powers, maybe with one different than the others. Everyone's running the same powers, the same upgrades, the same feats, the same ability scores. Like everyone is sort of running the same character in some aspects compared to what it used to be and what D&D is all about. D&D is, like, at least to me, is all about making a character feel like a character. In an MMO, you're not really going to ever get that sense of like You can get some sense of character if you're role playing, right? But like it's not as integral as the mechanical side of things to a lot of players. But like mechanically, there's so little identity to be had there in this game. In the past there was, and even recently with the enchantments and stuff like that there was, but they've just gotten rid of it for seemingly no reason. And it's really weird to me that they're taking one of the massive advantages of having D&D and having the IP that they've got and just throwing it away for no benefit. It's just strange to me that like they've gotten rid of a ton of that player agency, a ton of that player choice, and replaced it with gear choice instead in some cases, which just isn't as exciting. There was a lot more variety in the past that they've just seemingly scrapped for a much more easier to control game, because there was a lot of power creep before, and a lot of times where one character would come in and completely dominate the meta, and they've fixed that at least so that every character is viable, but it did come at the cost of things, and I feel like they haven't quite recovered from that, and that was years ago.
A job that needed a hammer, they grabbed a jackhammer
Yeah,
and destroyed
yeah.
destroyed the nail.
As you were saying, they've just taken a jackhammer to it when it didn't need it. Like, even in a design perspective, like the player agency and like the decisions that people are making and the content they're doing, it's strange. It really is. And I don't think anybody can adequately like go, oh, why are they doing this? Because no one knows.
It's definitely disconnected. If someone told me, like if and which I reached out to developers, but no one wanted to talk to me. If a person had come forward and been like, "Oh no, we all play the game," I'd be like, "There's no way." Like,
Yeah.
bold-faced lie, it's not possible. Because if you played this game, the problems with the game are so in your face. You know, I've interacted
Yeah.
with the game for 50 hours. The weirdness of it is so obvious. Sometimes, you know, a game will make a change and it'll be a drastic change and people get really vocal about it. They'll get really angry about it, but that's because they don't like change in general, or you know, they felt like maybe it was a little unnecessary and blew up. The changes are so drastic and they alter the game on such a fundamental level in some ways that the game, I would say the game today is almost a completely different game than it was like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yep, 100%. Even like less than that, like we're talking about 2 years ago, 100%. It was very different. There was very different requirements to be good at the game, very different powers, and like a very different game balance. It's strange that it has ended up this way, I guess. I don't know. It's such a weird thing to have like such fundamental parts of the game change after so long without any thought being put into it. I don't think that change is inherently bad to a game. I think if a game's been out for 8 years, that it's expected that things will change, that some key like systems even just don't work anymore and need to be adjusted. There is room, and I do feel like the devs should be allowed to make those changes if they're telling us. And like even with the enchantment rework, they did give us a lot of warning about that happening, and I do think that that part of communication was good. They said what they wanted to change. They were pretty upfront with how things were going to work, and that is how it ended up working. Except there needs to be a dialogue when they're making those changes between the current players about whether those changes are actually going to positively impact the game. The enchantment system is really weird because like that's the most recent one, so it's kind of what's fresh in everyone's mind that's playing this. For the players that hadn't invested any resources really into the system, it is a massive bonus to them, because then they get a new system that is significantly easier to improve your enchantments in. They don't take as much time. They actually have a significantly more impact. There's a lot of like the negatives in the previous system that were addressed, and I do think that they took some of that advice quite well. And then when of course it hits live, the system doesn't work. There's a lot of problems with it. It took away a ton of the player agency. Everyone's running the same stuff, and it's really taken away some of the fun before it. Especially if you're a like veteran that had like tons of this stuff. All your stuff went to pretty much zero value. Like if your stuff was maxed before, you're not maxed after the changes. You're not even close to max. They should be allowed to make these changes, but they need to make it with the understanding of the community that plays the game.
Yeah, and I think that's when you get into that. What is the community's overall perspective of what the
Yes.
game should be, and the developer and manager's idea of what the game is going to develop into? And if those two
Yep.
things aren't in sync with each other, no one's going to be happy. Then the development team is better off making a completely different game, because that's essentially what they're doing is just trying to make what people have invested, in some cases, tens of thousands of hours into. It just feels like
Yep.
their game is it doesn't feel like a new, better game is being made. It just feels like their game is being incinerated. It's a sad thing too, because you're investing so much time into it. And of course, the player feels like something that they have ownership of on some level is being broken, but then the company, the developers, the managers who are actually making the game feel the same level of ownership over it, and that they can do whatever they want with it. They feel like they're expanding it, they feel like they're growing it. God, it's so important for developers to play their games. I've never seen an MMO be consistently successful without people in the company who play it.
I feel like this is also worth mentioning. I don't think anyone's really would have spoken about it. The community manager for Neverwinter is somebody called Julia, or at least was. I think she's being promoted. She is a really frustrating individual because despite being a community manager, there is very little dialogue that's had. It's always like, as you probably see it, it's always a trust us sort of thing. But then for about a month, like I think she went on a holiday or something, or like whatever, we got the Star Trek Online guy to come in. And the difference between the level of communication was staggering. Like we went from having nothing to we actually knew what the decisions they were making for that month was. It was such a massive difference in the quality of the communication to us, in the responses we got back, and the fact is that we did, at least I felt that the feedback we were sending to him at the time was actually being heard. Or at least heard by him. Maybe not the people in the upper management. He doesn't play it. I don't think he plays our game, but it didn't matter because he was solid at being able to appreciate that, yes, you've got people in our game that have played 10,000 hours in it. It really just sort of cemented in my mind that this game really doesn't need that much to improve the developer side of things, to like developer and player communication. It just needs a couple of individuals who are willing to be the bridge between us and to tell us what improvements they want to make, what changes they want to make, and where. If you're not playing the game, at least accept the general community opinion. Like ask 40 or so people in the community that have played it for a while at varying different bits of time. And again, if you get the same feedback over and over again, then maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's where they should be focusing their resources to fixing it, or to improving it, or to making changes in these places, instead of doing sweeping changes on the enchantment system that very few people were complaining about beforehand.
Like, this doesn't feel very good. Can we tweak it? And they're like, sure, bring out the
Yep.
bulldozer. You're like, wait,
Yep.
wait, no, that's not what we meant. Yeah, when they're like,
It's
leveling feels a little tedious, it feels a little long, they're like, no more experience, level 20.
Yeah, level 20. Like, and it was just like, oh, here, removing six regions. Okay, why didn't you take the option of just having us pick 4 or 5 of them when we're leveling up? Like, say, hey, finish the tutorial, and then it comes up with, hey, which of these areas do you want to head to? And then allow us to play through those. You're only spending a few hours in these areas anyway, and they're not that populated. It just feels like a waste to just have these areas just sitting on a hard drive somewhere instead of actually allowing people to experience them.
I can only imagine a group of developers who are like reading the negative feedback to some of the changes and them being like, they said they didn't like the leveling system and we fixed it and now they're still angry. We can't make these people happy. They're incapable of
Yes.
being satisfied. That's where that communication is so important, because you need that middleman to be like, you fixed the problem in a way. You may have over fixed the problem in a lot of ways. And I think just having someone who can dismantle the angry community down to its useful parts and give those parts to the developers and be like, you don't need to attach all the negative emotion to this. Just take the constructive parts and build something with those, and the community will be happy.
And as I've stressed throughout this entire thing, like they've clearly got something internal about where they want the game to go. And if they don't, then that's crazy. Like that they're running a game without having any idea where they want to take things. It just feels like they should make that public and to show it, because the community currently doesn't believe that anything that they're doing is going to be positive for the game. Not after they've just spent 2 years butchering it.
You know, when you talk about workplace culture, like your work culture, and then sometimes getting a new manager or swapping a few rules around or whatever will change that culture. I think that game development companies don't understand that their player base is part of their workplace culture. that they're not separate, and if you make them separate, that's when they become at odds with each other. Then everyone collectively hates over monetization of the game, but we can all accept that it's necessary and that it's going to happen and that we all hate it together. You know, it's better to be angry together with the developers than that frustration being directed at each other. Yeah, you think about something like RuneScape, it's like if you have a development team and a community that have a symbiotic bond with each other, like we expect your playtime and your money investment, and you respect the idea that developing a game is probably a little harder than you think it is.
Yes.
If we can both agree on those things, that we both have equal ownership over this thing, I think it would be hard not to make a successful game. Like it would be difficult not to. I don't think that like big giant changes would have to happen. I think the community would be more tolerant of updates taking a longer amount of time. They'd feel better about the money they invest. If you can get that bond back, if you can repair the bond, I think the success of the game is just an automatic consequence. So my final question for you would be, now that we've come to this, we know where we were at, we know where the game came from, we know the current state of the game, we know that the negative is currently trending. However, the game has got many, many, many positive things going for it. Brand new player is considering the game and they're like, I have probably about 4 to 5 hours a day, 6 days a week that I plan on playing a game. I want something I can really sink my teeth into. Should I play Neverwinter?
I don't see a problem with trying it. I don't see a problem with going through and actually like playing through, sitting down, running through it, especially like the early game, maybe 1 or 2 campaigns that interest you. Definitely do that. Whether you're going to make it your main game, I wouldn't make that step, but it's definitely something that is worth trying. It's worth playing through and seeing it, and especially if you've got a connection to D&D, run through the adventures to see like areas like Undermountain, like Dreadring, like Icewind Dale. You can like go and see them, and they're fun areas to go through. Would I devote all 5 hours of my downtime to it every single day and stick to it as your main game? Probably not. I would advise against that. Maybe in the future that will change.
I appreciate your well-balanced answer.
Yes.
Because a lot of times when you get to a question like that, people are like, it's worth all of your time. There's no downside. It couldn't possibly be bad. And I'm like, damn it. Like, oh, can't use that because that's bold-faced bullshit after hearing everything we just talked about.
Or you get the reverse where it's just super, super negative. Don't do this. Don't play this. It's not going to improve. No, I can see this game improving. I can see that you will have fun in it. I definitely had fun. Everyone I've taken through with the like base early game had fun with it. It's at the upper end of the game and in the upper middle where things start falling apart. Like you can make it your main game, but definitely quit the second it stops being fun to you.
Well, thank you very, very much for your time and your insights. Really, really, really fantastic interview, fantastic information. Thank you very much.
Good, and thanks for checking out our game as well. Like, it's awesome that got somebody that actually is taking the time to learn it. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you again. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Yeah.